In the fading twilight of a June evening, millions held their breath as a frail figure in powder blue stepped toward a glowing crystal orb. For 70 years, she had been a constant in an ever-changing world, weathering scandals, wars, and the transformation of an empire into a commonwealth. Now, at 96, Queen Elizabeth II faced what many believed would be her final great ceremonial moment. The beacon before her was no ordinary flame. Connected to a network of 3,000 beacons stretching from the Falkland Islands to the Scottish Highlands, this single touch would ignite a chain of light across the globe, binding together nations that once stood under the same crown. But, as palace insiders knew, this ceremony carried deeper significance than anyone in the cheering crowds could imagine. Behind the pomp and pageantry lay months of careful orchestration, family tensions, health scares that were kept from the public, and a monarch's quiet determination to fulfill one last duty to her people. What appeared to be a simple lighting ceremony was actually the culmination of a complex web of relationships, traditions, and personal sacrifice that defined not just a reign, but the very essence of what it meant to serve. The crystal orb waited, its surface reflecting the faces of thousands gathered in the quadrangle of Windsor Castle. In moments, the Queen's touch would send light racing across continents. But the real story wasn't about beacons or Jubilee celebrations. It was about a woman who had promised her life to service and the extraordinary lengths she would go to keep that promise, even when her body was failing and her family was fracturing around her. The morning sun cast long shadows across the east terrace of Windsor Castle as Queen Elizabeth II stood at her bedroom window, watching the final preparations unfold below. Workers in high-visibility vests moved with practiced efficiency, setting up barriers and testing sound equipment for the evening's Platinum Jubilee Beacon ceremony. At 96, she had witnessed countless such preparations, but today felt different. Her reflection in the ancient glass showed a woman whose body bore the weight of 7 decades on the throne, yet whose eyes still held the determination that had carried her through the darkest moments of her reign. Dr. Sarah Chun, the Queen's personal physician, had arrived earlier that morning with her usual black medical bag and a concerned expression she tried to hide behind professional courtesy. The Queen's recent health challenges had been carefully shielded from public view, but those closest to her knew the truth. The mobility issues that had forced her to miss several recent engagements were worsening, and the palace medical team had spent weeks developing contingency plans for the beacon ceremony. "Your Majesty," Dr. Chun had said during their private consultation, "I must advise caution. The evening will be lengthy, and you'll be required to stand for extended periods." The Queen had listened politely, as she always did, before delivering her standard response to such concerns. "Doctor, I have made a commitment to my people. That commitment does not include the luxury of convenience." The beacon ceremony represented more than just another royal engagement. It was the culmination of the Platinum Jubilee celebrations, marking 70 years since she had become queen at the tender age of 25. The symbolism was profound. 3,000 beacons would be lit simultaneously across the United Kingdom and Commonwealth, each one representing the enduring bonds that held together nations, communities, and families under the constitutional monarchy she had spent her life serving. But symbolism and reality often existed in different realms, and the reality facing the royal family in June 2022 was far more complex than the carefully choreographed public ceremony suggested. Prince Harry and Meghan's absence from many of the Jubilee events had created an undercurrent of tension that palace staff worked tirelessly to manage. Their explosive interview with Oprah Winfrey the previous year had sent shockwaves through the institution, and while official statements maintained diplomatic language, private conversations among senior royals revealed deep hurt and concern about the monarchy's future. Prince William had arrived at Windsor the previous evening, bringing with him not just his wife Catherine and their 3 children, but also a burden of responsibility that seemed to grow heavier with each passing month. As second in line to the throne, He understood better than most that his grandmother's advanced age meant the monarchy was entering a period of inevitable transition. The beacon ceremony would likely be one of her final major public appearances, and he felt the weight of that knowledge in every conversation they shared. She's determined to see this through. William had confided to his father, Prince Charles, during a private dinner the night before. But I can see the toll it's taking on her. Charles, now 73, and having waited longer than any heir in British history, found himself in the peculiar position of wanting to support his mother while also preparing for the responsibilities that would soon fall to him. The complexity of their relationship, loving son and dutiful heir, patient successor, and protective child, played out in subtle gestures and unspoken understandings. The logistics of the beacon ceremony had consumed palace staff for months. Angela Kelly, the Queen's personal assistant and dresser, had worked closely with the design team to create an outfit that would be both ceremonially appropriate and physically manageable. The powder blue coat and matching hat were chosen not just for their elegant simplicity, but for their practical considerations: lightweight fabrics, easy fastenings, and a design that would allow for discreet support if needed. Below in the castle's oak room, members of the household cavalry were making final preparations for their ceremonial roles. These men and women, resplendent in their scarlet tunics and plumed helmets, represented centuries of military tradition. For them, the beacon ceremony was both honor and duty, a chance to participate in a moment of living history while serving the monarch they had sworn to protect. The technology behind the beacon lighting was a marvel of modern coordination. Tom Bradley, the ceremony's technical director, had spent 2 years developing the system that would allow the Queen's touch to simultaneously ignite beacons from the Channel Islands to the Caribbean. The central crystal orb, designed specifically for this moment, contained sophisticated sensors and communication equipment hidden within its elegant exterior. When the Queen placed her hand on its surface, signals would race through fiber optic cables and satellite links to trigger the lighting sequence across multiple time zones. But technology, however sophisticated, was only as reliable as the people operating it. Bradley's team had run countless tests, developed multiple backup systems, and prepared for scenarios ranging from power failures to severe weather. They understood that millions of people would be watching and that any technical failure would be magnified on the global stage. The pressure was immense, but so was their dedication to ensuring that the Queen's moment would be flawless. In the castle's private apartments, personal protection officers moved with quiet efficiency, checking security arrangements one final time. Detective Inspector James Morrison, head of the Queen's personal protection team, had coordinated with multiple agencies to ensure that the evening's events would proceed safely. The threat assessment had identified no specific concerns, but Morrison's experience had taught him that vigilance was the price of security in an age of global terrorism and social media-driven protests. The Queen's daily routine that morning had been carefully modified to conserve her energy for the evening ceremony. Her usual meetings were abbreviated, her afternoon rest period extended, and her medical team remained on standby throughout the day. Lady Susan Hussey, her longest-serving lady-in-waiting, had been with her for nearly 60 years and could read the subtle signs of fatigue that others might miss. The two women shared a relationship that transcended the formal boundaries of royal service, built on decades of shared experiences and mutual respect. As the afternoon progressed, guests began arriving at Windsor Castle. Commonwealth High Commissioners, government ministers, military officials, and representatives from charitable organizations took their places in the specially constructed viewing areas. Each had received detailed instructions about protocol and procedure, but more importantly, each understood that they were witnessing a moment that would be remembered long after the evening celebration had ended. The Queen's grandchildren had gathered in the green drawing room, their conversations a mixture of excitement and underlying emotion. Prince George, at 8 years old, was beginning to understand the significance of his great-grandmother's role, while his siblings Charlotte and Lewis brought the innocent enthusiasm that could lift spirits even in moments of gravity. For them, this was both family gathering and state occasion, a duality that defined much of their young lives. Princess and the Queen's only daughter arrived with her characteristic no-nonsense efficiency. Known for her direct manner and unwavering work ethic, and had inherited much of her mother's sense of duty and practical approach to royal responsibilities. She understood, perhaps better than her brothers, the physical demands that the evening would place on their mother, and she positioned herself to provide discreet support if needed. The Commonwealth representatives present that evening carried with them the hopes and expectations of nearly 3 billion people across 54 nations. For many Commonwealth countries, the Queen remained a powerful symbol of stability and continuity in an increasingly uncertain world. The beacon ceremony would broadcast that symbolism across the globe, reinforcing bonds that had evolved from empire to voluntary association, but remained surprisingly strong despite decades of change. As evening approached, the Queen began her preparations for the ceremony. Angela Kelly helped her into the powder blue coat that had been specially designed for the occasion, each button and pleat carefully positioned to create the perfect silhouette while ensuring comfort and ease of movement. The matching hat, adorned with a simple brooch that had belonged to Queen Mary, completed an ensemble that would be photographed and analyzed by fashion experts around the world. The Queen's jewelry for the evening had been chosen with typical care and attention to symbolism. Her pearl necklace, worn for countless state occasions, represented the timeless elegance that had become her signature. The diamond brooch on her lapel had been a gift from the Commonwealth of Australia, a subtle acknowledgement of the global nature of the evening celebration. Each piece told a story, carried memories, and contributed to the visual narrative of a reign that had spanned from the age of empire to the digital era. In the final hour before the ceremony, Windsor Castle hummed with controlled activity. Police snipers took their positions on ancient battlements, their modern weapons incongruous against the medieval stone. Television crews made last-minute adjustments to camera angles and lighting. Palace staff moved through their final checklists with the precision that came from decades of managing state occasions. The Queen spent those final moments in quiet reflection, standing once again at her bedroom window as the sun began to set over the Thames Valley. The view before her encompassed not just the formal gardens and ceremonial preparations, but the weight of history itself. From this same castle, her predecessors had ruled through civil wars and world wars, through the rise and fall of empires, through the transformation of Britain from a global superpower to a modern constitutional monarchy. Her private secretary knocked softly on the door, his voice carrying the formal tone that marked the transition from private person to public monarch. "Your Majesty, it is time." She nodded, adjusted her handbag on her arm, and prepared to fulfill what many believed would be her final great ceremonial duty. The beacon waited in the quadrangle below, ready to send light racing across the Commonwealth and into history. The grand corridor of Windsor Castle echoed with the measured footsteps of the Queen's procession as she made her way toward the quadrangle where 3,000 guests awaited her arrival. Each step carried the accumulated weight of 70 years of similar walks, 70 years of ceremonies where her presence transformed ordinary moments into historical events. Tonight, however, those familiar footsteps seemed somehow more deliberate, more precious, as if everyone present understood they were witnessing something that might never happen again. Lady Susan Hussey walked slightly behind, and to the left of the Queen, her position determined by decades of protocol, but her attention focused entirely on watching for any sign that assistance might be needed. The two women had developed an almost telepathic communication over their 60 years together, able to convey complex messages through subtle glances and minor adjustments of posture. Tonight, Lady Susan's trained eye detected the barely perceptible signs that the Queen was drawing upon reserves of strength she might not have possessed even months earlier. The Queen's walking stick, crafted from polished oak with a silver handle bearing the royal cipher, had become more than an accessory in recent months. While palace statements described it as a comfort item, those closest to her knew it had become essential for maintaining the balance and stability that ceremonial occasions demanded. The stick itself was a work of art, commissioned specifically for the Jubilee celebrations, and incorporating wood from trees planted on the Windsor estate by King George VI, adding layers of personal and historical significance to every step. Prince Charles walked behind his mother, his face carrying the complex emotions of a man watching his parent fulfill what might be her final major ceremonial duty. The heir apparent had spent his entire adult life preparing for the moment when he would assume the throne, but seeing his mother struggle with the physical demands of monarchy brought home the reality that change was approaching faster than anyone wanted to acknowledge. His relationship with his mother had evolved over the decades from dutiful son to trusted advisor, and now increasingly to protective child concerned about a beloved parent. The state apartments they passed through told the story of British monarchy in oil paintings and gilt frames. Portraits of Queen Victoria, King George V, and her father King George VI gazed down from their positions on the walls, each representing different eras of royal service and sacrifice. The Queen had grown up among these images, learning from childhood that she was part of a continuum that stretched back centuries and would continue long after her own reign ended. As they approached the doorway leading to the quadrangle, the sound of the military band could be heard playing ceremonial music that had accompanied royal occasions for generations. The Royal Marines Band service had rehearsed extensively for this moment, understanding that their performance would provide the soundtrack for what millions of viewers around the world would remember as a defining moment of the Platinum Jubilee celebrations. Captain James Fletcher, the officer commanding the evening's ceremonial guards, stood at attention as the royal party approached. A veteran of 3 tours in Afghanistan, Fletcher understood duty and service in ways that resonated deeply with the Queen's own sense of obligation. For him, participating in the beacon ceremony represented the intersection of military tradition and national celebration, a chance to demonstrate the armed forces' continuing commitment to crown and country. Technical preparations for the beacon lighting had reached their final phase. Tom Bradley, monitoring the ceremony from his control position, watched multiple screens showing beacon sites across the Commonwealth. Teams in Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and dozens of other locations stood ready to participate in the coordinated lighting sequence. The complexity of synchronizing this global event while ensuring perfect timing for television broadcast had required unprecedented cooperation between royal households, government agencies, and technical specialists across multiple continents. In the quadrangle, representatives from across the Commonwealth had taken their designated positions. The High Commissioner for Australia, Dr. George Brandis, stood among a group of diplomatic colleagues who represented nations that had chosen to maintain their connection to the British Crown despite achieving independence decades earlier. For these nations, the beacon ceremony represented not colonial nostalgia, but an evolved relationship based on shared values and voluntary association. The lighting system itself was a masterpiece of modern engineering disguised as traditional ceremony. The crystal orb that would serve as the evening's focal point contained sensors that would respond to the Queen's touch by triggering a cascade of signals around the globe. Backup systems included satellite communication links, internet connections, and even old-fashioned radio transmissions to ensure that technical failures could not derail the ceremony. Princess Anne positioned herself strategically where she could observe her mother's condition throughout the ceremony, while maintaining the formal positioning required by protocol. Anne's reputation for practical common sense and direct action made her the family member most likely to intervene if the Queen showed signs of distress. Her presence provided both visible support and invisible security for a woman who had spent 7 decades putting duty before personal comfort. The Queen's dresser, Angela Kelly, watched from her position near the castle entrance, her experienced eye checking every detail of the monarch's appearance. Kelly had dressed the Queen for thousands of occasions over their decades together, developing an instinctive understanding of how fabrics moved, how accessories caught light, and how every element of royal attire contributed to the overall impact of ceremonial moments. Tonight's outfit had been designed specifically to project strength and continuity while accommodating the physical realities of advanced age. As the royal party reached the threshold of the quadrangle, the assembled guests rose to their feet in unison, creating a sea of formal evening were punctuated by military uniforms and diplomatic sashes. The sight that greeted them was breathtaking. Windsor Castle's ancient stone walls illuminated by carefully positioned spotlights, the beacon's crystal orb gleaming in the center of the space, and rows of faces representing every corner of the Commonwealth and every level of British society. The Queen paused momentarily at the entrance, a gesture that those who knew her recognized as her way of gathering herself for the performance ahead. Despite 70 years of public appearances, she still felt the weight of occasions like this, still understood that millions of people would judge not just her actions, but the institution she represented based on the next few minutes of ceremony. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, stood ready to deliver the blessing that would formally begin the beacon lighting sequence. As spiritual leader of the Anglican Communion, his presence connected the ceremony to the religious traditions that had shaped British monarchy for centuries. His prayers would invoke divine blessing not just for the Queen, but for the Commonwealth family of nations whose representatives filled the quadrangle. Commonwealth youth representatives, chosen from dozens of countries, waited near the beacon with barely contained excitement. For them, this ceremony represented connection to traditions they had learned about in school, but never expected to witness firsthand. Priya Patel from India, Marcus Williams from Jamaica, and Sarah MacDonald from Canada stood among their international peers, each carrying the hopes and pride of their home nations. The media presence for the ceremony was unprecedented, with television crews from every major broadcaster providing live coverage to audiences around the world. The BBC's royal correspondent, Nicholas Witchell, had covered decades of royal occasions, but even as experienced, I recognized the special significance of his commentary would help global audiences understand not just what they were seeing, but what it meant for the future of monarchy and Commonwealth. Security arrangements for the evening represented the culmination of months of planning by multiple agencies. Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Morgan coordinated between local police, royal protection officers, and security services to ensure that the ceremony would proceed without incident. The threat level was considered manageable, but Morgan's team prepared for scenarios ranging from medical emergencies to protest disruptions. The Queen's medical team remained on standby throughout the evening, positioned discreetly where they could respond immediately if needed. Dr. Sarah Chun carried emergency medications and portable equipment, while nurses and paramedics waited in locations invisible to guests and cameras, but accessible within seconds if required. Their presence represented the careful balance between acknowledging health concerns and maintaining the dignity of ceremonial occasions. Prince William and Catherine positioned themselves among the family group, their 3 children adding an element of natural joy to the formal proceedings. Prince George, at 8 years old, was beginning to understand the weight of family tradition and future responsibility, while Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis brought the spontaneous energy that could lift spirits and lighten moments of gravity. As the Queen emerged into the quadrangle, the military band struck up "God Save the Queen," and 3,000 voices joined in the familiar words that had accompanied royal occasions throughout her reign. The sight of the tiny figure in powder blue moving slowly but steadily toward the beacon created a moment of profound emotion that transcended political differences and national boundaries. The crystal orb awaited her touch, its surface reflecting the faces of representatives from 54 Commonwealth nations, each connected by threads of history, language, and shared experience that had evolved from imperial control to voluntary association. In moments, her touch would send light racing across continents, but the real illumination came from the example of service and dedication she had provided throughout her unprecedented reign. The ceremony was about to begin, and the world was watching. The crystal orb stood before Queen Elizabeth II like a glowing monument to 7 decades of unwavering service, its faceted surface catching and reflecting the lights that illuminated Windsor Castle's ancient quadrangle. As she approached the beacon, the weight of the moment seemed to press down on everyone present, creating a silence so profound that the only sounds were the gentle rustling of evening dresses and the distant murmur of crowds gathered outside the castle walls, hoping to catch a glimpse of history in the making. Archbishop Justin Welby stepped forward to offer the ceremonial blessing that would mark the beginning of the lighting sequence. His voice, trained in the acoustics of great cathedrals, carried clearly across the quadrangle as he spoke words that connected the evening's celebration to centuries of tradition. Almighty God, who by thy providence hast called thy servant Elizabeth to be our queen, grant that she who has been blessed with long life and faithful service may continue to serve thee and her peoples with wisdom and strength. The prayer encompassed not just the queen, but the entire Commonwealth family, acknowledging the complex relationships that bound together nations separated by oceans but united by shared history and common values. Representatives from Australia to Zimbabwe bowed their heads as the Archbishop's words reminded them that they were participating in something larger than a simple ceremonial occasion. Prince Charles watched his mother's measured approach to the beacon with emotions that spanned decades of their complex relationship. As a young man, he had sometimes chafed at the restrictions and expectations that came with being heir to the throne. As a middle-aged prince, he had struggled to find his own role while waiting for a responsibility that seemed perpetually delayed. Now, as a grandfather himself, he saw his mother's courage in continuing to fulfill her duties despite physical challenges that would have forced most people into comfortable retirement years earlier. The Commonwealth youth representatives stood transfixed as they witnessed living history unfold before them. Priya Patel, the 18-year-old delegate from India, had grown up hearing stories from her grandmother about Indian independence and the transformation of the British Empire into the Commonwealth of Nations. Tonight, she was seeing the embodiment of that historical transition in the form of an elderly woman whose reign had spanned the entire post-colonial era. Technical Director Tom Bradley monitored his control screens with the intensity of a mission controller at NASA. The beacon lighting system represented 2 years of development and testing, creating a network that could simultaneously trigger lighting sequences across multiple time zones and geographic regions. Backup systems monitored primary communications links, while satellite feeds provided real-time confirmation from beacon sites around the world. The crystal orb itself was a marvel of modern technology disguised as traditional ceremonial art. Pressure sensors embedded in its surface would detect the Queen's touch and translate that physical contact into digital signals that would race through fiber optic cables and satellite links to beacon sites from the Falkland Islands to the Solomon Islands. The engineering team had tested the system hundreds of times, but everyone understood that this single moment would determine whether months of preparation had been successful. Princess and maintained her position near the beacon, her experienced eye watching for any sign that her mother might need assistance. Anne's relationship with her mother had been shaped by their shared commitment to duty and service, creating a bond based on mutual respect rather than sentiment. Tonight, that relationship translated into protective vigilance as she monitored the Queen's condition throughout the demanding ceremony. The assembled guests represented a cross-section of Commonwealth society that would have been impossible to imagine when the Queen first ascended to the throne in 1952. High commissioners and government ministers stood alongside charity workers and community leaders, creating a gathering that reflected the evolution of both monarchy and Commonwealth over 7 decades of change. Lady Susan Hussey positioned herself where she could provide immediate assistance if needed, while remaining invisible to the cameras broadcasting the ceremony to global audiences. Her 60 years of service to the Queen had taught her to anticipate needs before they were expressed and to provide support without drawing attention to the assistance being given. Tonight, those skills would be tested as she helped the monarch navigate one of the most challenging ceremonial occasions of her reign. The Queen's approach to the beacon was measured and deliberate, each step carefully calculated to conserve energy while maintaining the dignity that ceremonial occasions demanded. Her walking stick, crafted from Windsor estate oak, provided both physical support and symbolic connection to the land she had served throughout her reign. The stick had become an extension of herself, as essential as the crown jewels for maintaining her royal presence. Commonwealth military representatives stood at attention as the Queen passed, their uniforms representing armed forces that had evolved from imperial armies to national defense forces while maintaining connections to British military traditions. Colonel Patricia Hughes of the Canadian Armed Forces felt the weight of representing not just her own service, but the millions of Commonwealth military personnel who had served under the Crown throughout the Queen's reign. The beacon lighting ceremony had been choreographed with the precision of a military operation, but underneath the formal structure lay deep emotional currents that touched everyone present. Dr. Margaret Chun, the Queen's physician, monitored her patient from a discreet distance, ready to intervene if the physical demands of the ceremony became too much for a 96-year-old woman who had refused to let age diminish her commitment to duty. Television audiences around the world watched as the Queen drew closer to the crystal orb, understanding that they were witnessing what might be her final major ceremonial appearance. BBC commentator Nicholas Witchell provided context for viewers, explaining the significance of beacon lighting traditions that stretched back to the Armada and have been revived for royal celebrations throughout the 20th century. The Queen paused before the beacon, her hand resting on her walking stick as she gathered herself for the culminating moment of the ceremony. The crystal orb glowed with internal light, its surface smooth and warm to the touch, waiting for the contact that would send signals racing around the globe. Behind her, 3,000 guests held their breath in anticipation. Commonwealth representatives felt the emotional weight of the moment as they prepared to witness the lighting that would connect their distant nations to this ancient castle and the tiny figure who had been their constitutional monarch for 7 decades. The ceremony represented continuity in an age of constant change, tradition in an era of technological revolution, unity in times of global division. Prince William and Catherine exchanged glances that conveyed their understanding of the historical significance they were witnessing. Their children, Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis, represented the future of the monarchy that their great-grandmother had served with such dedication. Tonight would become part of their own memories of royal service and family tradition. The Queen raised her hand toward the crystal orb, the movement slow and deliberate as she prepared to complete the gesture that would illuminate beacons across the Commonwealth. Her fingers, bearing the ring she had worn for decades, approached the smooth surface that would translate her touch into global celebration. Angela Kelly, watching from her position near the castle entrance, felt the pride that came from knowing she had helped prepare the Queen for this moment. The powder blue coat and matching hat had been designed not just for visual impact, but for comfort and ease of movement, allowing the monarch to fulfill her ceremonial duties despite the physical challenges of advanced age. The moment of contact arrived with surprising quietness. The Queen's hand settled gently on the crystal orb surface, her fingers spread against the warm glass as sensors detected her touch and began the cascade of signals that would race across continents. For a heartbeat, nothing seemed to happen, and then the beacon burst into brilliant flame, illuminating the quadrangle with golden light that reflected off ancient stone walls and contemporary evening wear. The sight of the beacon's flame brought spontaneous applause from the assembled guests, a sound that rolled across the quadrangle like a wave of appreciation for both the ceremony and the woman who had made it possible. The Queen stepped back from the beacon with visible satisfaction, her duty completed and her promise to her people fulfilled once again. Across the Commonwealth, beacons began blazing in response to the signal from Windsor Castle. From the Tower of London to Sydney Harbour, from the Canadian Rockies to the hills of Scotland, flames appeared in the gathering darkness, creating a chain of light that spanned the globe and connected millions of people in a moment of shared celebration. The Queen's face, illuminated by the beacon's glow, showed the quiet satisfaction that came from duty fulfilled and promises kept. At 96, she had once again demonstrated the commitment to service that had defined her reign from its earliest days. The beacon ceremony was complete, but its significance would resonate long after the flames had died down and the guests had departed into the night. The flames from the Windsor beacon had barely begun to flicker when the first confirmations started arriving from beacon sites across the Commonwealth. Tom Bradley's control room erupted in quiet celebration as monitors showed successful ignitions from Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and dozens of other locations where local representatives had gathered to participate in this unprecedented display of global unity. Each flame represented not just a successful technical connection, but a living demonstration of bonds that had evolved far beyond their imperial origins. In Sydney, Australia, the beacon atop Sydney Harbour Bridge blazed against the backdrop of the Opera House, creating a spectacular image that television cameras broadcast back to Windsor and around the world. Governor-General David Hurley stood with local representatives as they watched their flame join the global chain of light, understanding that they were participating in a moment that connected their modern, independent nation to traditions that spanned centuries. The technical achievement represented by the coordinated lighting sequence was remarkable in its scope and precision. Signals from Windsor had traveled through fiber optic cables, satellite links, and wireless networks to reach beacon sites that spanned 12 time zones and every populated continent. The engineering team led by Bradley had created a system that could coordinate events happening simultaneously in daylight and darkness, in urban centers and remote locations, in countries where the Queen was head of state and others where she served as head of the Commonwealth. At Buckingham Palace, where thousands of people had gathered despite the Queen's absence, the lighting of the Victoria Memorial Beacon brought roars of approval from crowds who had waited hours for this moment. The flame illuminated faces that reflected the diversity of modern Britain, from recent immigrants who had chosen to participate in this celebration of their adopted country's traditions to families whose connection to the monarchy stretched back generations. Prince Charles watched the Commonwealth beacons appear on monitoring screens with emotions that mixed pride in his mother's achievement with awareness of the responsibilities that would soon transfer to him. The global response to the beacon ceremony demonstrated the continuing relevance of both monarchy and Commonwealth in an age when many had predicted their inevitable decline. The challenge for future generations would be maintaining these connections while adapting to changing times and expectations. In Canada, beacons blazed from the Parliament buildings in Ottawa to lighthouse stations on the Atlantic and Pacific coasts, creating a chain of light that stretched from sea to sea to sea. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau participated in the Ottawa ceremony, representing a generation of Commonwealth leaders who had grown up during the Queen's reign and understood her unique position in their nation's constitutional arrangements. The Queen herself remained at Windsor for several minutes after the initial lighting, watching as reports arrived from around the globe. Each confirmation brought visible pleasure to her face, the satisfaction of seeing a complex ceremonial vision successfully realized. Lady Susan Hussey stood beside her, sharing in the quiet triumph of duty fulfilled despite the physical challenges that had made this ceremony more demanding than any previous royal occasion. Princess and coordinated with palace staff to ensure that the Queen's participation in post-ceremony activities would be carefully managed. The original schedule had included a reception for Commonwealth representatives, but medical advice suggested that the beacon lighting itself should mark the end of the Queen's formal participation. Its practical approach to royal duties meant she understood when protocol should give way to common sense. Commonwealth youth representatives found themselves unexpectedly moved by the ceremony they had just witnessed. Marcus Williams from Jamaica, who had arrived at Windsor with the casual attitude of his generation toward traditional institutions, discovered that witnessing history being made had affected him more deeply than expected. The ceremony had transformed abstract concepts about Commonwealth connection into tangible experience of shared celebration. The technological coordination required for the global beacon lighting had pushed several Commonwealth nations to upgrade their communications infrastructure specifically for the ceremony. In smaller nations like Tuvalu and St. Kitts and Nevis, the beacon ceremonies represented the largest international media events in their history, bringing global attention to islands that rarely appeared in international news. Television audiences around the world watched as the beacon sequence spread across the globe like a wave of light moving with the sunset. BBC World Service provided commentary in dozens of languages, while local broadcasters added their own cultural context to coverage of an event that demonstrated how global communications could enhance rather than replace traditional ceremonies. The Queen's withdrawal from the quadrangle was managed with the same careful attention that had characterized her arrival. Angela Kelly and Lady Susan Hussey flanked her as she moved slowly toward the castle entrance, their positions providing both ceremonial dignity and practical support. The Queen's determination to complete the ceremony without visible assistance had been successful, but those closest to her could see the physical cost of that achievement. In Scotland, beacons blazed from Edinburgh Castle, Stirling Castle, and dozens of locations across the Highlands, creating a network of flames that honored both Scottish heritage and connection to the broader Commonwealth family. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon participated in the Edinburgh ceremony, representing a Scotland that maintained complex relationships with both monarchy and English political dominance while celebrating shared cultural traditions. The coordination of beacon lighting across multiple time zones had required unprecedented cooperation between royal households, government agencies, and volunteer organizations. In some locations, ceremony organizers had worked through the night to ensure their beacons would light at the precise moment when the Queen touched the crystal orb thousands of miles away at Windsor Castle. Commonwealth military representatives who had gathered at Windsor found themselves serving as informal ambassadors for their home nations throughout the evening. Colonel Patricia Hughes from Canada spent the reception period answering questions about Canadian military traditions and constitutional arrangements, helping British guests understand how Commonwealth relationships had evolved since decolonization. The beacon ceremony's success created immediate discussions about how similar events might be organized for future royal occasions. Palace event coordinators began planning for Prince Charles's eventual coronation, understanding that the global response to the Jubilee beacons had demonstrated both the technical possibilities and the continuing popular appeal of royal ceremonial occasions. Dr. Sarah Chun maintained her medical monitoring of the Queen throughout the ceremony and its immediate aftermath, ready to intervene if the excitement and exertion proved too demanding for her 96-year-old patient. The Queen's successful completion of the beacon lighting represented a personal victory over the physical limitations that increasingly constrained her public activities. In Wales, beacons lit across the Principality from Carnarvon Castle to Cardiff Castle, honoring both Welsh heritage and the Prince of Wales who would soon become king. The ceremonies provided opportunities for Welsh speakers to participate in events conducted in their own language while joining the broader Commonwealth celebration. Commonwealth High Commissioners gathered at Windsor used the ceremony as an opportunity to reinforce diplomatic relationships that extended far beyond constitutional monarchy. Trade discussions, cultural exchanges, and political cooperation all benefited from the personal connections that developed during ceremonial occasions like the beacon lighting. The Queen's private reflections on the ceremony would remain largely unknown, but those who knew her best understood that the successful coordination of Commonwealth participation had provided deep satisfaction. Throughout her reign, she had worked to transform imperial relationships into voluntary associations, and the beacon ceremony demonstrated how successful that transformation had been. Local communities across the Commonwealth had organized their own celebrations to coincide with the beacon lighting, creating grassroots participation that extended far beyond the official ceremony sites. Village greens, town squares, and community centers hosted gatherings where people of all ages came together to mark the Queen's 70 years of service. The beacon sequence continued for nearly an hour as confirmations arrived from the most remote locations. Christmas Island, Tristan da Cunha, and other isolated Commonwealth territories added their flames to the global celebration, demonstrating how modern communications technology could include even the most distant communities in shared ceremonial moments. As the immediate excitement of the beacon lighting began to settle, palace staff started the complex process of managing the Queen's transition from public ceremony to private rest. The successful completion of what many considered her final major ceremonial appearance had exceeded all expectations, but the physical and emotional demands of the evening required careful recovery management. The global response to the beacon ceremony would continue to resonate for days and weeks as Commonwealth governments, media organizations, and community groups analyzed the implications of such widespread voluntary participation in a royal celebration. The event had demonstrated that reports of the monarchy's declining relevance had been significantly exaggerated, at least within the Commonwealth family of nations. The final flames of the Commonwealth beacons were still flickering across distant time zones when Queen Elizabeth II settled into her private sitting room at Windsor Castle. The powder blue coat carefully hung away and replaced by the comfortable evening wear that marked her transition from public monarch to private individual. The successful completion of the beacon ceremony had provided deep satisfaction, but in the quiet moments that followed, she allowed herself to acknowledge the physical and emotional toll of what many recognized as her final great ceremonial performance. Lady Susan Hussey remained with the Queen during those first private moments after the ceremony, their 60-year relationship allowing for comfortable silence, broken only by the distant sounds of guests departing the castle grounds. The two women shared an understanding that transcended formal protocol, built on decades of shared experiences that had taken them through the highest moments of royal celebration and the darkest periods of family crisis. Dr. Sarah Chan arrived for her post-ceremony medical assessment with the discreet efficiency that had characterized her service to the royal household. The Queen's vital signs remained stable, but the physician noted signs of exhaustion that would require several days of reduced activity to address. The determination that had carried the 96-year-old monarch through the demanding ceremony had drawn on reserves that needed time to replenish. Prince Charles joined his mother for a private debriefing that served multiple purposes beyond simple family conversation. As heir apparent, he needed to understand the Queen's assessment of the ceremony's success and its implications for future royal events. As a devoted son, he wanted to ensure that his mother felt supported and appreciated after an evening that had demanded everything she had to give. The global media response to the beacon ceremony exceeded all expectations, with television audiences estimated in the hundreds of millions and social media engagement breaking records for royal events. The sight of the tiny figure in powder blue successfully completing such a demanding ceremony had touched viewers around the world, creating an outpouring of affection and respect that transcended political differences and generational boundaries. Commonwealth governments began issuing official statements praising both the ceremony's success and the Queen's continued dedication to duty. Prime ministers and presidents who had been preparing for the eventual end of her reign found themselves reassessing timelines and expectations, impressed by her demonstration of continuing capability despite advancing age and health challenges. The technical team, led by Tom Bradley, conducted their post-ceremony analysis with the satisfaction that came from flawless execution of a complex operation. The beacon lighting system had performed perfectly, creating the global coordination that transformed a simple ceremonial gesture into a moment of genuine international significance. Their success would influence planning for future royal occasions and demonstrate the possibilities created by modern communications technology. Princess Anne coordinated the careful management of her mother's schedule in the days following the ceremony, ensuring that the Queen would have adequate time to recover while maintaining the essential functions of monarchy. Anne's practical approach to royal duties had made her the family member most trusted to balance ceremonial demands with health considerations. Commonwealth youth representatives departed Windsor with memories that would shape their understanding of royal traditions and Commonwealth connections for decades to come. Priya Patel from India, Marcus Williams from Jamaica, and their international colleagues had witnessed history being made, transforming their abstract knowledge about constitutional monarchy into personal experience of its continuing relevance. The Queen's private reflections on the beacon ceremony would never be fully known, but those closest to her understood that the evening had provided a fitting culmination to 7 decades of royal service. The successful coordination of Commonwealth participation had demonstrated the evolution of imperial relationships into voluntary associations based on shared values rather than political control. Angela Kelly began the process of preserving the ceremonial outfit worn for the beacon lighting, understanding that future historians would want to examine every detail of what might prove to be the Queen's final major public appearance. The powder blue coat and matching hat would join thousands of other royal garments in the carefully maintained archives that documented 7 decades of public service through fashion and ceremonial dress. Palace staff worked through the night to process the overwhelming response to the beacon ceremony, fielding messages from world leaders, Commonwealth officials, and ordinary citizens who had been moved by the Queen's demonstration of continuing dedication to duty. The positive response provided encouragement for a royal household that had faced unprecedented challenges in recent years. The beacon ceremony's success created immediate discussions about its historical significance and long-term implications for the monarchy. Royal historians recognized that they had witnessed a defining moment that would be remembered alongside the Queen's coronation, wedding, and other milestone events. The sight of her successfully completing such a demanding ceremony despite advanced age had created a powerful image of duty fulfilled and promises kept. Commonwealth military representatives who had participated in the ceremony returned to their home nations with enhanced understanding of the traditions and relationships that connected their forces to broader international networks. The ceremonial aspects of the beacon lighting had reinforced bonds that extended far beyond constitutional arrangements to encompass shared professional values and operational cooperation. Local communities across the Commonwealth continued their own celebrations long after the official ceremony had ended. Village celebrations, school assemblies, and community gatherings provided opportunities for people to reflect on the connections that bound together nations separated by geography, but united by history and shared experience. The Queen's successful completion of the beacon ceremony provided a powerful response to critics who had suggested that advancing age made continued public duties impossible. Her demonstration of continuing capability, despite obvious physical challenges, reinforced arguments about the value of experience and dedication in leadership positions. Prince William and Catherine used the days following the ceremony to discuss with their children what they had witnessed and its significance for their own future roles. Prince George, at 8 years old, was beginning to understand the weight of family tradition and constitutional responsibility, while his siblings would carry memories of their great-grandmother's final great ceremonial moment. The technological achievements represented by the beacon lighting system attracted attention from event organizers around the world, who recognized the possibilities created by global coordination of ceremonial occasions. The successful integration of traditional pageantry with cutting-edge communications technology provided a model for future international celebrations. Commonwealth academic institutions began planning scholarly conferences and research projects focused on the beacon ceremony's demonstration of continuing royal relevance in the 21st century. The event had provided concrete evidence that reports of monarchy's inevitable decline might be premature, at least within the Commonwealth family of nations. The Queen's medical team maintained enhanced monitoring in the weeks following the ceremony, ensuring that any delayed effect from the physical and emotional demands of the evening would be quickly identified and addressed. The successful completion of such a demanding public engagement at 96 represented a remarkable achievement that required careful follow-up care. Television broadcasters around the world continued analyzing the beacon ceremony's significance and impact, recognizing that they had covered an event that would be remembered as a defining moment of the Queen's reign. The global audience response had demonstrated continuing public interest in royal traditions and Commonwealth connections that many had assumed were declining in relevance. Palace event coordinators began incorporating lessons learned from the beacon ceremony into plans for future royal occasions, understanding that the successful integration of health considerations with ceremonial demands had created new possibilities for managing royal duties in an era of increasing longevity. The Queen's private conversations with her closest advisors in the days following the ceremony revealed her satisfaction with the Commonwealth response and her gratitude for the support that had made the evening possible. Those conversations would remain confidential, but the sense of duty fulfilled and promises kept was evident to everyone who knew her well. Commonwealth diplomatic representatives used the beacon ceremony's success as evidence of continuing relevance in their discussions with international partners who had questioned the value of maintaining constitutional monarchies in the modern era. The global response to the Queen's final great ceremonial moment had provided powerful ammunition for defenders of traditional institutions. The beacon flames had long since died down, but their symbolic light continued to illuminate discussions about duty, service, and the enduring value of institutions that connected past and present. Queen Elizabeth II had completed what many believed would be her final great public ceremony, leaving behind a legacy of dedication that would inspire future generations long after her own reign had ended. As the immediate excitement of the beacon ceremony gave way to quiet reflection, those who had witnessed it understood that they had participated in something extraordinary. The sight of a 96-year-old woman fulfilling her ceremonial duties with grace and determination had created a moment of profound inspiration that transcended political boundaries and cultural differences. The light from Windsor Castle had indeed traveled around the world, but its most important illumination came from the example of service and dedication provided by a monarch who had kept her promises to her people for 70 years and continued to do so even when the physical demands seemed almost impossible to meet.